Michelle, I just wanted to thank you for sending over such detailed responses to my questions in preparation for this session. It's definitely useful to have the background on where you're at and what's giving you trouble.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Of course. So what's going on for you? You talked a lot about games.
So my thing was, I know that the games is the section where you can typically, they say you can improve the most and gain more points on if you improve that section. It's like the most learnable section to improve. And my thing is, I struggle with two things. I struggle with timing, and I struggle with actually setting up those diagrams, because I know that I get a game and then I start reading and then I start kind of getting anxious or nervous because I'm not super certain as to whether my setup is strong or if it's the correct setup or the most efficient. And then by then I'm already losing time. I get to the questions and I find myself towards the last questions. I'm either doing the first ones all the way correctly, and when I hit the third or fourth game, not having time, or I'm just guessing.
That's a very common situation to be in. Games are tough. They are the most learnable, but they're also the hardest at first. What you major in college?
I did psych, and I did a psych and bio. I had never seen a logic game before, ever. So I've been learning what a logic game is by practicing the questions.
Yeah. And how many questions have you done? How many games have you tried out?
I took a course called Kaplan, or not Kaplan. Yeah, I think it was Kaplan. I will tell you that I feel like it didn't help at all. I almost feel like I ended up more confused than when I started, because they do a diagnostic test and I scored, I think, about the same from start to finish. And I then tried to study a little bit more just off of the books they gave me, and I stayed in that same area.
Wow, that must have been really discouraging.
I wanted to cry.
It's totally understandable. And unfortunately, that does happen to a lot of people. Some of these classes, it's hard to get personalized attention. And then if the methodologies don't work for you, you're kind of stuck in that. So I'm glad that you're using different materials now and that you've reached out and found me, because I think that there's a lot that we can do together. And you said you've done half the games in that book, but that may not actually be that many games. Maybe it's at most a couple dozen, right?
Yeah, it's probably a couple dozen.
Yeah, and there's over 350 released LSAT logic games ever.
Yeah, there's a lot.
So for that reason, I think you don't need to do all of them, of course. But if you were to even expose yourself to 100 or 150 of those games, you would see more of the patterns they contain. A couple dozen really isn't enough. The LSAT does repeat itself, and there are certain trends, but there's enough variety that you almost need a larger sample to start seeing the patterns.
I also bought the 10 official ever released LSATs by, I think LSAC is the one who they basically they have it on their website. So I bought those, but I didn't want to start those until I felt like I didn't want to waste them until I felt like I actually had this material down a little bit more solid. So my plan, you can totally help me, because I read some of your emails where you talk about creating a study plan, manageable one. What I've been doing is I said, okay, so I'm going to forget whatever I learned in Kaplan, and I'm going to start start fresh, because clearly that's not working. My other thing was to start just drilling in those practice tests, like 1 to 2 per week. But I don't know. I'm not the expert, and you have a lot of great tips on your email, so I don't know if you have any suggestions for me.
Well, that's really nice of you to say, Michelle. I'm glad that you found the emails helpful. I'd say that any LSAT textbook is only going to have so many games in it, because there are high licensing fees associated with reusing the LSAT questions in a different book. So I'm glad that you got the actual official book of 10 exams. And yeah, you're right that if you were to just have one book of 10 exams and go through all those problems now, you wouldn't have that much available to do later timed. But what if you were to get a few books of 10 exams? Then you could save some to do untimed or even individual timed sections, and save others to do as full-length exams closer to test day.
Which ones would you recommend? Because I saw there's a list. They go up to 6 series. So there's a ton. There's up there, and I'm pretty sure there's a lot of previously released, I just can't remember the exact number of released LSAT or LSAT exams that they call now for practice. I'm assuming that I don't know what that number is really. Like which ones are the best ones to leave for, once I feel like the material's solid, and which ones to utilize as practice to study with.
This is actually a particular interest of mine. So I'm glad that you raised this question. One of my favorite things to do, and one of the most popular things I have, are my LSAT study schedules. As you said, I have some emails about them as well, but basically I break it down so that I'm telling you, read these pages in this LSAT textbook, complete, then read these articles on my site that break it down more simply, then complete these exact practice problems. And so you're wondering, well, which practice problems should I do? And so I tell you in the schedules, so you can check it out for all the details. But to summarize it, I'll say, if you're taking the LSAT, in June or July?
The goal would be July, but I am also scared because the format's changing, so it's different than what I'm practicing. And that was actually another question I had for you, because up until recently, I heard, I decided I was going to, when I was going to take the LSAT, I'm like, okay, now it's going digital. When we were in the classroom, and I was like, from what I knew, it was always going to be written. So at this point, I think that's a second component I need to also prepare for.
Yeah, definitely. Great question. We'll get to both of those. So the first part is you're taking in July. That means you've got about 3.5 months. So you have enough time to do a couple dozen exams. I'd say start with exams 52 to 61 to build your foundation untimed. Then you could do 62 to 71 and 72 to 81 and then 82 to 86. And so 52 to 61, you do those untimed, building your foundation, doing questions by type. I have detailed categorizations on my site and linked in the schedules as well, breaking down game types and breaking down logical reasoning types, and then even reading passages as well. And the schedules are not just to say, do ordering games, then grouping games, then combination games. I get into even more depth where I'm saying, do the easy ordering games, then the moderate difficulty ordering games, then the most difficult ordering games, then do the easiest grouping games, moderate grouping, and so on. So breaking down bit by bit, step by step. Then you have exams in the 60s and 70s and 80s to do timed. And I would suggest don't do all of them in a row, of course. It's way too many, and you don't have enough time. But also, you want to save some of those newest ones to do in the event that you have to do a retake. Okay. Because a lot of times students will just do everything in the 70s and 80s and then have, let's say they want to retake, as more and more people are doing all the time, but they've already used up everything recent. So maybe out of 60s, 70s, 80s, do only the even numbered ones or only the odd numbered ones. And that way you're saving at least 5 to 10 of those newer exams to do for a retake if you want to go for one in September, October, November. And retaking is more common than ever. And I actually recommend it typically because let's say that your true aptitude is around, let's say, a 155 or a 160, just to make something up. There's a margin of error of 3 points on either end, meaning that if, let's say, you score at your perfect average or even a few points below, just through blind luck, you could do 3 to 4 points better, or maybe even 6 points better, with nothing else in your understanding changing. But obviously, even just a point or two more can make a big difference in your admissions chances.
And I actually, what's interesting? I read something that I think you talk about too. I read them in the morning. So I read your emails in the mornings. And it was like this frustration because you have these goal scores and you can increase by a certain amount of points. And then my concern is my goal is so far off of what I'm at. You know what I mean? I want to set a realistic thing for myself, but I also have a goal. I'm pretty sure every kid or every student has this where they're like, okay, I have this dream school that I want to get into. So I don't know how realistic it is to aim for that dream score given my current score. I'm practiced my initial diagnostic and I've been consistent about 145, 146. No plus or minus. It's always spot on 145, 146, 147, 145, always those scores. But I also haven't finished, like I said, I didn't feel like Kaplan helped me at all. I literally feel like I went into the class and they just taught you about what a logic game is and what these things are, which in a sense it's helpful. It's like the ABCs of what the LSAT is, but I didn't actually feel like I gained anything from that. If anything, I felt like it almost made me feel like I was doing worse.
Well, it's kind of that's natural, by the way. It's kind of a funny thing where a lot of times people start actually learning the techniques and the methodology and the terminology of the LSAT, and then their score drops. It's the craziest thing. It's because oftentimes it causes us to overthink things when your aptitude alone will actually carry you pretty far. What happens though is on the tougher questions, things fall apart if you don't have a technique or strategy in mind. And then there's also the fact that you might have conflicting methodologies if you're using multiple systems, so you're not really sure how to go about it. And then there's the other thing where maybe untimed, you could do pretty well, but when you introduce the timing, things fall apart. Does that happen to you?
Oh, that happens a lot. So like when I do the untimed logic games, I pretty much get most of them, if not like all of them right. Maybe I miss one when it's untimed, but it takes too long. I mean, I know that realistically you get like 8 minutes per game. And I know, or 8.5 minutes per game, but it takes me like 15 minutes per game right now. And that's 15 times 4. That's like an hour. I have to cut it by half hardcore.
Of course. But the good news is that you do have time. And you said, how far can I improve in a certain period of time? Well, as we're talking now, you've got 3.5 months till July. And that is plenty of time, given that you're not starting from scratch. You already have some foundation. And especially since you haven't really improved at all yet, even though you did Kaplan, that means that there is plenty of room.
Okay.
Everybody improves somewhat just through gaining familiarity with the exam. So my guess here is, and tell me if I'm wrong, that maybe there's a certain degree of overthinking and overcategorization going on with this stuff.
I definitely agree. I definitely agree. And that's why I've been approaching this when I'm like, okay, nothing's working from that system. I'm throwing it away. I'm not using any of it. I'm starting from scratch. Like if I was learning a new language, like you said, I'm kind of curious. I would like to do that, where you structure your schedules and you practice based on, the question type, because that way you're practicing in one area and you're getting better in that area before going to the next one, or just kind of building up. There's more structure to that, which I feel like I don't have.
Exactly. So I think that the key thing for you, given that you're self-studying, is get your hands on one of these day-by-day study plans where I really break it down bit by bit. And for you, I'd recommend getting the 4-month or the 5-month, even though there's only 3.5 months remaining, because you're not starting from the beginning necessarily. You've already done some work with the actual LSAT problems in the textbooks and such. So I'd say start off with that, start with the games portion, and it'll tell you exactly how to incorporate additional practice problems to supplement what you've got in the textbook. And so maybe you want to do a couple dozen games of each type before moving on to the next type to really solidify your understanding. And that way, because there's 3 phases. There's accuracy, untimed. Then there's pacing with individual sections. And then there's endurance with the full-on 5-section exams.
Yeah.
And so I think maybe you're jumping the gun a little bit, not doing enough practice problems when you need to do more of them to build your understanding untimed. And you said that you're doing well untimed, but I think that there is a certain potential efficiency you can bring with a deeper understanding, because as you know, timing is such a big part of this exam. And the short answer to getting faster is just to have a better understanding.
I absolutely agree. And that's where I'm trying to figure out, like I get scared because I'm like, okay, I'm just reading all this on logical games, but then I also need help with logical reasoning. Should I combine? It's like this uncertainty. So I think that the schedule, like you're talking about, would really help me structure, because that's what I lack. And then this whole, I think I get anxious when I don't know whether I should be doing, what I should be focusing on, it's actually a lot harder than I thought.
Yeah, so, it is. It's harder for everyone than they initially think. I thought I could knock this out in 2-3 months when I first started, but my scores stayed in the low 150s for a long time when I had dreams of a 170 plus. And it ended up taking me a full year. And I don't want it to take you that long, of course, but it does typically take longer than we expect. And I think that for most people, it does take them 5 to 6 months to reach their fullest potential. Now you've got 3.5 remaining, but you've also been studying for a while. So I think that collectively you could have enough time to be good for July.
Another thing too would be, I consider taking it July and then just already telling myself, okay, I'm retaking it October. And that if I take it in July and I do well, great job. I'm going to give it my absolute all, but I'm not going to stop studying so that I still take it in October. And if I love my score, absolutely fantastic. And if not, October is like, but at the same, because I'm not, I don't want to put a timeline. My goal is 172 actually, or I would, and that's really high given what I've been doing as my diagnostic. You know what I mean? It's a really high jump. So that means there might be a lot more in my process that I need to do to get to that score, which for me, I'd rather put in the time now, because I think from the research I've done, the higher you get on that score, I think it pays off, especially in law school.
It does. There's documentation of this, and a single point on the LSAT could be another $4,000 in value. And if you think about the ROI on that over the course of your entire career being leveled up in that way, it's huge. I mean, getting more scholarship money, $5,000, $10,000 a year, even getting a full ride or getting into a better law school, 170 if you want a top 14, that's not out of reach. And it does take a tremendous amount of work. It does take giving it your all. And I'm glad to hear that you're thinking about doing October as well. It's funny. I had an LSAT meetup the other night here in New York, and there was a guy there who was taking the March LSAT, and he had some anxiety and nerves about it, which is natural, of course. It happens to everybody. And so I said to him, would it kill you to pay the registration fee for June or July now, even if you might not take it, just to have the peace of mind knowing that this is not the only LSAT you have in front of you? Because, of course, while the LSAT itself in general is extremely important, no one particular test date is extremely important, especially since law schools do not average multiple LSAT scores. You can retake and retake and retake, and they'll take you with the best one you have.
Yeah, that's definitely, for me, I felt like that makes me study with more desire, because I'm not saying this is the only exam I could ever take. I know if I did that, that gives me this anxiety, like you mentioned, that he had, because that's given. I want to make sure I give it my absolute all, but that I also don't go in thinking this is it. If I don't do it now, I'm done. And I know that can also inhibit I feel like it can inhibit my actual scores or my success in exams. So I want to make sure like I'm realistic too, because going from a 145 to a 170, but I also feel like I need to take the July exam. So at least I know in those conditions where I'm at and what, kind of like a midpoint, because essentially October is still early enough to do an application. And it would have been, I want to make sure I'm taking care of what I need to take care of, because really my dream school is UCLA, and you don't get in with when anything below, I think 170.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, you could, depending on your GPA, maybe, but obviously a 170 plus will definitely improve your odds and any potential scholarship money that might come along with it. But it sounds like, honestly, you're giving it your all. You're giving it the time that it deserves. How many hours are you looking to put in per week?
I would like to. I read something where they suggested 40 hours a week as a good solid, just the minimum. I also have to do I do part-time work. So I tutor kids in the evenings, and I dog walk just to live. So I was working full-time, and then I was like, there's no way. There's absolutely no way I can stick to my schedule and dedicate myself and try to get a 170. Maybe other people can. I was just realistic with myself. I have other things that with my health and stuff that I have to take care of. So my best hours of the day between 11 or even 10 or 11 up until 8 o'clock. Anything after that, I start going downhill. And I think most people are like that. I want to be realistic, and my main focus is this exam. As crazy as it sounds, it's this exam. So I want to put in a good amount of time, which I'm hoping to do 40 hours. But if I have to do plus, I'm fine with that. Having a structure is what I need, because what I've been currently doing is any kind of in between, any breaks. I'm like, okay, I'm done at 12, and then I have till 5. Then I have a 5 to 6. Great. So stay at the library, and I'm like, good. 7 to 9, they're closing. Great. It's time to go home. That's kind of what my schedule looks like. Okay.
I like it. Now, first off, it's not crazy to make this your number one priority. You're talking to me, first of all. Of course, I think this should be the top priority, but also not at the expense of your health, not at the expense of your making a living in the meantime. And honestly, 40 hours sounds like a lot. I'd say the LSAT is a good part-time job, but unless you're doing it for a living like I am, it's not a good full-time job because it can lead to burnout. I can tutor several hours a day, but I don't. I work with a limited number of students. But either way, back when I did tutor several hours a day, it was my life, but it also wasn't. I didn't have the same level of personal investment in it because, of course, I can never care more about the result than my students do, right? Ultimately it's your life and it's about what you do on your end outside of our coaching sessions. But what I can say is that given that you're working part-time, you do have more time available to you for studying than most people do. So I can lay out for you what I consider to be an ideal but kind of boring LSAT studying lifestyle that lets you maximize your LSAT focus, but still keep everything else solid. So let's say you wake up anywhere from what time do you wake up typically?
Realistically, I wake up at about 7:30. 7:30 is I should be waking up earlier, but it takes me time. I wake up, I make coffee, I eat breakfast, and then it still takes me some time to kind of be okay.
That is okay. That is normal. And believe me, 7:30 is pretty good for someone who's not working an office job. Yeah. And it's not too far off from the sunrise, right?
Yeah, it's true.
No, that's great. So let's say you do all your getting ready morning stuff by, let's say 9:30, 10, you're ready to go. Mm-hmm. And you said 11's like a good starting point for you. So let's even say 11. 11's okay. Let's say you study and you ate breakfast already, so you don't need to have an early lunch. But let's say you study from 11 to 1:30 or 11 to 2. That's a good 3-hour block. You incorporate a few breaks here and there throughout that 3-hour block, maybe 5 minutes here, 10 minutes there. It's all good. You take a break for lunch at 1:30, 2 o'clock, maybe 30 minutes, maybe 45 minutes. You go for a walk if the weather is good. Now, I guess in California, it's always good, right? So you have that as your benefit. So you got that. Then you come back to studying, let's say at 2:30, 3 o'clock. You do another 3 hours till 6. That's enough. That's fine. That's 5.5, 6 hours in a day. That's all you really need. Any more than that could lead to burnout, especially if you're doing this 5 or more days per week. I would also definitely recommend incorporating some off days. Typically in my schedules, I'll include 2 off days per week, maybe sometimes 3, especially when you're doing full-length exams. And then in the evening, you have dinner, you see friends and family, you relax, you watch some TV, you take a hot bath, it's all good. You wake up the next day and restart. And what does your studying involve? Those 3 phases: accuracy, untimed, pacing, individual sections, then endurance. You also, of course, want to incorporate review of weak areas, review of every exam and section that you do.
Oh, I like that. I started making a mistake journal. That's the only thing that I got out of Kaplan. The instructor, I went to her and I asked her, I was like, hey, so when you took it, what did you do? And she's like, I didn't take Kaplan. So her first answer was like, I didn't take Kaplan, but I did make a mistake journal. So, I mean, that might help. That way you're able to see what your mistakes. And that was another question I had. I know we have like 5 minutes, but I feel like when I get into Kaplan, when I get into my mistake journal, I don't know how much is too in depth with like writing up, because it's a lot of time that I'm putting into like for like a question that's a mistake. But then at the same time, what's too much? Like, is there no such thing as too much because I got it wrong and I really need to get it?
That's an excellent question. I'm glad you raised it, because the review process is really the most important aspect of studying, and it's too often overlooked. Now, mistake journal is great, but I'd go beyond that. Not just your mistakes, but everything that gives you trouble, everything you have difficulty with, anything at all that you're confused by. So the mistakes are, I think of them as what you got wrong. But then there are also the questions where you were oftentimes down to 2 and you guess, and you only focus on the ones you got wrong, but there's still all those other ones you got right and you just got lucky. So if you consider those as well, you may actually double the number of questions that you have the opportunity to review and the opportunity to learn from. The real value in doing problems is in finding the areas that give you the most trouble so that you can hone in on those. And then yes, keep a journal, keep a running list of everything you've ever had difficulty with. And then when you're writing out your explanations, you asked, how much is too much? Is there a such thing as too much? It's a great question as well. And I'd say there really isn't a such thing as too much if you're articulating your thought process and where you went wrong. You want to look at every single answer choice that tempted you that was wrong and figure out what was tempting about it and what ultimately made it wrong. And then on the flip side, for the right answer choice, what pushed you away from it? What discouraged you from it? But what ultimately makes it right? And then, of course, if your issue was with the stimulus and not with the question stem, not with the answer choices, or maybe with the question stem instead, you want to look at what in the stimulus was confusing. How did they increase the difficulty level of what was happening in the stimulus? Or maybe if the question stem was worded in an unfamiliar or confusing way, what was the key word or key phrase in that question stem that you misunderstood? And how does it actually relate to a more familiar question stem type?
It's a good observation. I did not think of that like that. So I really appreciate that. That's a great tip.
Yeah, of course. This is what I would recommend for pretty much anybody who's looking to learn from their mistakes, which is really, I think, again, the most important aspect of your prep. Now, obviously, if you write out your own thought process for every single question you ever have trouble with, that'll take forever, especially if you're getting a lot of questions wrong or having trouble with a lot of questions. And so what I would say is maybe pick a handful of the most difficult questions giving you trouble and focusing on those.
Okay.
And at the same time, maybe you want to reduce the number of questions you're completing so that you can review in more depth. A lot of times students will do 2-3 timed exams a week worth of material, and there's not really enough time to do all those exams and to review them all in sufficient depth and work on your weak areas and review foundational materials. It becomes too much, even if you're looking to do 40 hours a week. And again, based on what I laid out for you, I think that 6 hours a day, 5 days a week, with some breaks in the middle if possible, is the most I would recommend. And so if that requires doing fewer exams, fewer practice problems, that's totally fine.
So in this case, it's, I'm looking towards like actually looking into your schedules, because I've seen that, you have different options for schedules. At this point too, is that in conjunction with a book?
Yeah, sure. Great question. I think the most important thing in using the schedules is the actual LSAT prep tests in books of 10 on Amazon. They're published by LSAC. Each book of 10 is about $20 each. And so the only thing you need for the schedules is those books of 10 exams. I recommend getting 3 of them and then the individuals. So 52 to 61, 62 to 71, 72 to 81, and then the individual ones, which are currently 82 to 86. Now, if you want to use other materials, I do have references and citations for where to go elsewhere. I also have articles to various articles on my site, which of course are freely accessible. I do include references to some of my other materials, like the courses and some of the guides and cheat sheets and such. But those are really optional things to consider. All you really need are the actual LSAT exams.
Okay, so that's pretty good. I have two of them. I have the 5 and the 6, but I probably want to start it with the earlier versions and leave those for, like you said, the timed. So my next step would be just like looking into the schedules and purchasing the Amazon earlier 10, like you said. I think so it would be this up from the 62 to 71. I'm sorry, the 52 to 61 and the 62 to 71, at least right now, for me to start out with practicing.
That sounds perfect.
I really appreciate your help. You've been awesome. Thank you so much.
Of course, Michelle. It's my absolute pleasure. Is there anything else you would need to feel complete for today to know what to do going forward?
No, it was super helpful, because I feel like now I have a plan for how to structure the rest of my studying a little bit more efficiently for the following. It could be anywhere from 3.5 to all the way till October, which would be 5-6 months at this point. But I feel better. Like I feel better. I lacked a lot. I lacked any kind of ideas with structure. So that's why I super appreciate having had this meeting with you.
I'm really happy to hear that. That's why I do this sort of thing. What would you say is the biggest insight that you got from our session today?
Definitely learning that I can still survive and like actually get this, like actually tackle this with a structured schedule and still have a life. Because I get a lot of feedback from family members who are like, oh, I guess to do well, you should be studying 8 to 10 hours. You have to stay inside your house all day, every single day. Like, it's hard to do that too when you want to do part-time work and you kind of have to survive. And also, like you said, the whole burnout. But I think that 6 hours a day and having every 1 or maybe 2 off days helps me feel like, okay, I can do this and I can structure my schedule and I can do this. I'm going to put a lot of work, but it's doable. It's manageable.
It is. And you're in the fortunate position to be able to study full-time or close to it. And so I think that you're definitely maximizing your odds to gain that significant score increase.
It's not without, like I said, scary to do so because I had to quit my job and now I'm, living off of savings and living off of my extra side cash, like I said, tutoring and dog walking. But I think it's worth it because I was in a 40-hour job where it was horrible and my mind was racing at 100 miles per hour, 8 hours a day, a 2-hour commute. So I really I wasn't grasping anything effectively. And this is my first priority. So.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad it's your first priority. The people who do the best on this, like I said, they do tend to make it their number one mission and focus. So I think that given your commitment to this and investing yourself in the process, you'll be in a better position to improve your score than most. And I look forward to seeing how you progress along the way. I want you to keep in touch with me and let me know if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep.
Thank you so much. I will definitely reach out to you because I'm going to pick a schedule that I think your 5-month schedule or 6-month schedule sounds really good to me.
Perfect. Well, keep in touch as you move forward. Again, I'm happy to help however I can.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.